All right, in this tutorial, we're going to take a deep dive into selections and alpha channels, and we're going to learn how we can use them to isolate a subject from its background or a background for its subject. And then what we're going to do is use that to change the background of our image and preserve the color that we've done to the model. So let's go check it out. Here we go. All right, so we're going to start off with a deep dive into selections and the alpha channel. This is some fundamental information that I believe it's really necessary to understand. Even if you're using some of the more advanced tools, everything comes down to these fundamentals. So let's take a look at how selections work, and then we'll move that into alpha channels. So the first thing is we're going to just take a look at selections just using some of the simple selection tools on your toolbar. You have an elliptical marquee and a rectangular marquee. And I'm just going to take the elliptical marquee, which is going to allow me to draw an oval or a circle. If I hold the shift key down, it allows me to draw a circle. And I'm just going to draw that on the screen. So this is sometimes referred to as a marquee, a selection. Sometimes in tutorials you'll see it referred to as marching ants. And what this represents is areas that are editable, meaning that if I take my brush tool and I start to paint in here, I'm only painting what's inside my selection. I'm prevented from painting outside of the selection. Right? So that's, in the basic sense, that is what a selection does, is it either makes something editable or not editable. And so I just deselected that. You can go to the select menu and deselect. So the select menu is all these tools that work with selections. We won't get into many of them, but the one that I just used was deselect. You can also reselect, so whatever you just deselected, you can reselect, or you can go to the select menu and select all, meaning that you've selected the entire document, in which case the entire thing is editable. Now with this all selected, I'm going to go to the edit menu and fill, and I'm just going to fill it in with white to essentially delete everything. And now select and deselect, or Command or Control D to get rid of that. One other thing that I do want to point out up in the select menu, I'm going to draw another circle in here, is that right now the inside of the circle is selected, but if I wanted everything outside of the circle to be selected and the inside to be prevented from having anything done to it, I can go to the select menu and inverse my selection. And what that means is now when I paint, I can't paint on the inside of the circle, but I can paint all around the outside of it. All right, so what I want to show you now is that you can take the selection and you can save it, meaning that you can store it and come back later on and use it. And that's what we're going to use, this fundamental idea of saving your selection. This is what we're going to use later on when we change the background of our image. So I'm going to draw this circle again. And there's two ways to save your selection. The first is to go to the select menu and go down here to save selection. And you're prompted to give it a name, right, or the location. I'm in document untitled 1. I want to make a new channel, and I'm going to call it circle selection. And I'm going to click on OK. Now where did that go? So if I go to my channels panel, where I had my composite and my component channels, I now have this new thing, this new channel called circle selection. And what that's referred to is an alpha channel. And that's where this information gets stored. Now I want to show you the second way that we can save this. So I'm just going to take this and delete it by dragging it down to the trash can. The other way that I can do it, if I go into the channels panel, I can click on this icon with the white rectangle and the black dot to save my selection as a channel. The difference between this and save selection is that it doesn't prompt me for a name. I can always rename it by double clicking it and calling it circle selection. Now by clicking on it, I've also entered into the selection itself. This is the alpha channel. This will not interfere with what the image looks like. It doesn't carry any color information like the red, green, and blue channels does. It's just a way for us to save the selection. And so wherever it's white in the alpha channel means that that's the area that's selected, and whatever is black means that it's not selected. A really good way to remember this is that black conceals and white reveals. All right, and we'll come back to that again and again. Now I'm going to click on the RGB channel, or the composite channel, and now that circle has disappeared. So now we want to bring this back so we can work on it. So how do we go about doing that? Well, if we go to the select menu, we can now load the selection, and we can choose the channel that we want. In this case, the only one that we have available to us, the only alpha channel we have available to us, is the one called circle selection. So I'm going to click on OK, and now that brings it back, which is really awesome. And I can paint in here, and it will limit my painting. Now I'm going to deselect this again, and I'm going to go into the circle selection channel. So now what I want to show you is that what you can do with this selection is you can edit this. All this is grayscale information, similar to the red, green, and blue channels. So that means that if I take my brush tool with white as my foreground color, I can now paint white, or I can paint selection into the alpha channel. So I'm just going to draw these little dots here. If I switch these colors and I choose to paint with black, now I'm painting these masked areas, or these non-selected areas. All right, so now I'm going to go back to RGB. All that disappears because that's not part of the image, it's just save selection. And what I can do is I can go to the select menu and load my selection. I'll click on circle selection again, and now I have all of this new stuff that was part of my alpha channel that I painted in white or I painted in black. And again, if I take my brush tool and I begin painting, it's only painting in those areas that were white. Okay, so black conceals, white reveals. White is editable, black is not editable. All right, let me undo that and I'll deselect that. Now let's go back into the alpha channel. The alpha channel is a grayscale channel, and it can hold more information than just black and white. So I want to show you what happens when we have that full range of grays inside the alpha channel. I'm going to select everything in here. All right, so I'm going to do Command A or Control A, and I'm going to hit delete on my keyboard. I can fill this in with black or white, it really doesn't matter. And I'm going to deselect, Command or Control D. Then I'm going to take my gradient tool. If I type G on my keyboard, I can get to the gradient tool. And I want to choose the black to white gradient. And I'm going to draw this gradient going across the screen. Now remember, I'm doing this in this alpha channel, the one that I was formerly called circle selection. Now it just has my gradient. If I go back to RGB, and then I activate the circle selection, and I'm going to show you a shortcut to do that. If you hold down Command or Control, and you hover over the thumbnail of that alpha channel, and then click on it, you can now activate that selection. Now, I drew a grayscale ramp in here, a gradient in here, going from black on the left to white on the right. My selection is only showing me the selection on the right hand side, because selections only show me 50% gray to white. From 50% gray to black, it won't show you the selection, but the selection is still active. And now what happens is if I take my brush tool and I paint from left to right, you're going to see that it partially reveals over here, then transitions to fully reveals, right? Partially reveals to fully reveals. Meaning that when I put a shade of gray in my alpha channel, depending on how light or how dark that gray is, it's going to partially reveal or partially conceal the edit that I'm doing. And in this case, just this line goes from invisible to fully present. All right, now I'm going to deselect. Just going to fill this in with white again to delete it. I want to show you one further way to edit the alpha channel information or the selection information before we jump into our image and talk about how we can create a selection of the background that will allow us to change the background's color. What I'm going to do is in my image, I'm just in the composite channel, I'm not in the alpha channel anymore. I'm going to make a selection, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to enter something called the quick mask. And what the quick mask is just a way to visualize the mask on top of the image. So you can get to the quick mask two ways. You can either type Q on your keyboard, or you can click on this icon at the bottom of your toolbar, and that will get you into the quick mask. So when I type Q, now I'm in quick mask mode. And what this represents is anything that's red is the areas that are not selected, and anywhere that's white or essentially clear is where it is selected. So in this case, red equals black equals not selected, and clear equals white equals selected or editable. And in here I can take my paintbrush tool, and if I paint with black, I'm going to conceal part of the selection, and if I reverse these colors and I decide to paint with white, I can now build into my selection. And then what I want to do is I need to get out of my quick mask mode. Before I do that, I just want to point out places that Photoshop is telling you that you're in quick mask. In your channels panel, it's going to show you that you're in something called quick mask. At the top of your window next to your title, it's going to say quick mask. So this is just indicating to you that the quick mask is active. To get out of quick mask, you can either click on this icon at the bottom of your toolbar or type Q on your keyboard, and now you have this updated selection that you can work with. All right, so we'll be using a combination of these tools when we get into our image, and we're going to add in one more selection tool that uses image information. So we're going to come back to the image that we've been working with, that we did our color balance and our white balance in. And our goal is to make a selection of the background, because I want to change the color of that a little bit so we can offer a little bit of a temperature contrast between foreground and background. Right now it's kind of gray. I want to turn the background a little bit more blue, but I don't want to affect our model in the front. I want to keep her nice and warm. So there's some further selection tools that we can use to create a selection for the background. Now, in Photoshop, as they keep enhancing it year after year, they build a lot of artificial intelligence into it, and so there is the ability to select the subject and have Photoshop examine the image and build the selection for you. But what I found is that even with these very fine details, it doesn't do as great of a job. So I want to show you a somewhat old school way of doing this that, again, just enhances your understanding of how selections work and how alpha channels work and how we can use this to our advantage, even if we decide later on that we're going to use more advanced tools. And the tool that we're going to use to do this is called Color Range. And what Color Range does is it looks at the image based on where you select, and it creates a selection for you based on color. Let's go ahead and click on that. And as you can see, when we get into the image, it's starting to build some kind of selection. Now remember, selection in the alpha channel is only black or white information. And so if I click on the screen in different locations, it's going to take that color into account and begin to build a selection from it. Now, it's never going to give you a perfect selection. Part of the reason is that there is a pretty broad transition of light in the background. We can certainly add to this by either clicking on this eyedropper with the plus sign or holding our shift key down to begin adding more things into the selection. But you're going to see that it's also picking up all this highlight information in her face. Now that's fine for our purposes, because what we're going to do is that after we make the selection, Then we're going to go into the alpha channel and edit it so we can get rid of the details that we don't want to have part of the selection, and we can clean up the edges where we do want to make sure that it's part of the selection. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click over here on the right hand side, and I can up what's called the fuzziness. And what the fuzziness does is it begins to include more color into the selection. And what I'm most concerned about in this is that I have a clear enough definition between the foreground and the background. If I have a nice clean edge, then all of my work is really easy. So I'm going to try this. I'm going to click on OK. And now it's building a selection. And you can see that there's things inside of our model's face that we didn't want to have part of the selection. And that's okay, because we're now going to edit this as an alpha channel. So I'm going to click on my channels panel, and I'm going to create an alpha channel from my selection. And now I have alpha 2 in here. And I'm going to deselect. Remember, Command or Control D. And so you're going to say to yourself, well, this looks really terrible. But what it has given us is all this fine detail for where these little pieces of hair stick out. Everything else is easy to deal with because we can paint out most of this detail. So I'm going to type D on my keyboard. D gets me to the default colors. And I'm going to type X because that's going to make black my foreground color. And I'm going to take my brush tool, which I just typed B on my keyboard. And I'm going to make the brush a little bit larger, even larger. Keyboard shortcut is to use your right bracket, and you can make this really big. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paint out as much detail as I can without going close to the edge. I'm going to show you how we deal with the edge in a moment. So I'm just going to go through and paint out as much detail as possible throughout our figure, right? Again, staying away from the edge. Go over to her shoulder and get really close, almost there. Do her hand. If I need to make my brush smaller, I'm going to hit the left bracket. And I'm going to try to paint out this information and this information. I'm making my brush smaller by typing the left bracket again. And get as close as I can to the edge. And we'll do the edges in a second because I'm just going to show you an easy way to work with that. And I'm going to show you another selection tool. All right, so pretty close, pretty close, pretty close. That's good for now. Now, 90% of our work is done. Now, the remainder that I have to paint out is everything up to this edge. And what I can do is I can take another selection tool called the Magic Wand, and I can click in these areas that are white or in the background. And so now the whole background is selected, but what I want to do is I want to paint out this edge and make this edge black against this white background. And the way to do that is to go to the Select menu and inverse my selection like we did previously. And now when you paint right up to that edge, and you're not worried about going into the background. All right, so painting up to this edge. I'm going to stay away from these fine hairs. I don't mind if they're kind of not perfectly black. All right, and I can go over to this edge, and I can go over to her ear, over here and down here, and around her hand. And I need to address this stuff in here, but we're going to do that separately. All right. Now I can deselect. Now you'll see that this made a partial selection because this area here is actually light gray. So we need to clean that up as well. So I'm going to deselect this. I'm going to switch my colors again. Right, so now white is my foreground color, and now I'm going to begin to paint out this information, right? Because I don't want that to have, I don't want this light gray to have an effect on the background. And if I want, I can build a selection here and begin to paint all this out as well. Made a really big brush, and as I get up to the edge, it's not having any effect, which is awesome. I just have to do some fine editing down here to clean this up. Oops, get to my brush tool and That does a pretty good job. Make my brush smaller with the bracket keys and clean all that up. And actually some of this information is just, I'm not even sure what this is, but we can paint that out. It's not that important to keep, right? Now the last information that we have is on her fingers, and I just want to show you a different way that we can work with this selection, and then we'll be ready to apply our hue shift for the background. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn visibility on for the image, and I did that by clicking on the eyeball icon next to RGB, right? So it means that the image is visible, but my mask is visible as well, and because the mask is highlighted, it means that that's what I'm working in. So this means that I can actually see the image while I edit this. And so I can flip my colors again. I just type X on my keyboard. And I can come in here and I can paint out to this edge. And I'm holding my shift key down in between clicks so I can paint in between my clicks. So I get this nice and cleaned up. And that is looking really good. I'm going to turn off the visibility for RGB. Oh, I see there's some stuff that needs to get addressed, so let's see if we can just paint that out in here. Turn on the visibility again. All right, I see where it is. It's right here on this finger. Whoops, that was painting with the wrong color. And I think I got it. Looks pretty good. All right, now we have a selection that we can use. The entire background is white. The figure is black. The figure is going to be prevented from any kind of image adjustment that we're going to do, and the background is where it's going to change. So there's one more step that we need to do before we finish this alpha channel, and that's to open up our levels adjustment layer and just make sure that the whites are as white as they are and blacks are as black as they are. So we can't do it via layer adjustment because we're in a channel, so we have to go to the image menu, adjustments, and then levels. And you'll see in the levels that there's a big spike of white over here on the right, and then there's like a little tiny mountain over here on the left for the blacks. So I'm just going to bring the black point in a little bit, and I'm going to bring the white point in right to the base of that mountain. And what that's going to do, is there was a lot of kind of like very light gray over here. It's just going to turn all of that to bright white. And that's exactly what we want for our mask. Let's go ahead and click on OK. Right, now that our alpha channel is finished, we can go into our RGB or composite channel, and then we can apply our hue saturation adjustment. So I'm going to go over to the layers panel. And then I'm going to click on my color balance layer. Now, the reason I want to do this is because the next adjustment layer that I put on here, which is going to be hue saturation, I want that to be on top. Otherwise, I'd have to move the layers around, which isn't difficult, but it just makes this convenient. The next thing I'm going to do is go to the select menu and load my selection. And I want to load Alpha 1. That's the one that we've just been working on. You saw that there was an alpha channel for color balance 1 mask, and that's because with all of these adjustment layers, there's always a layer mask attached to it, and we're going to work with that in a moment. So I just want you to be aware of what that is. Click on Alpha 1, click on OK. Our alpha channel shows up as a selection, and now we can go to the adjustment layer icon, click on Hue Saturation, and now we have a hue saturation layer in here, and next to it is the layer mask. And the layer mask is exactly what we just created in channels. Where it's white, it's going to let the effect of hue saturation through, and where it's black, it's going to prevent that from coming through. All right, let's take a look at the properties for hue saturation. We have hue, which represents the color, so red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. Saturation, the intensity of the color from pure color all the way down to no color at all. And lightness, which is a scale of luminosity. If it's all the way to the left, there's no lightness at all. If it's all the way to the right, there's full lightness. So our goal is to adjust the color of the background. I want the background to be a little bit cooler to make the model pop off the background, add a little bit of a contrast, a temperature contrast. And so what I can do is move this hue slider from left to right. And as you see, while I do that, you're going to see this subtle shift in color. Now, you can see what's happening by looking at this graph at the bottom. The top line represents the input, or what the image looks like originally, and the bottom represents what the image is going to look like. So you can see that I'm remapping any color that's like orange to blue as I move this back and forth. So I'm going to move this over here. I think I want something a little bit bluer, but maybe close to purple, and this is just to my eye. So we'll do something like that. And then I can boost the saturation, meaning that I can push the amount of color in there. And this is where we have to be a little bit careful, because there is all sorts of digital artifacts that will appear if we go too extreme. So I'm going to just pull that back as I need to. And then for lightness, I can darken it up, or I can add more light to it. And so this is where things get a little bit more subjective, right? Kind of what kind of color balance do you want? What kind of contrast do you want to create in your image? And like I said, I'm going to move this over here a little bit. I think I might just darken it up, give it a little saturation boost, try to get that to be a little bit bluer. And we'll see kind of what that does. All right, I think I like it somewhere around here. Of course, you know, to your eye, it might be something different. And so here's what we started with, and here's where we are now after doing the white balance, the color balance, and the hue saturation to the background. All right, I hope you've gotten a lot out of this tutorial. If you like what I do, make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you on the next one. All right, thanks.